Hello, hello, hello. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is, whatever day it is that you are coming to us from on this wonderful, wonderful day. How are we doing? Welcome to Rush to Judgment with Jessica, and I'm Jessica. It is nice to see you all again. It is nice to be here. If you are a returning viewer, welcome back. If you're new here, welcome. I'm glad to see you. Glad we are all here. Um, so we're just gonna jump right into it because we're knocking them out. So this is the trial of Nicole Nachtman. She is on trial for the murder of her mom and her stepdad. She is facing 2 first-degree murder charges in those in that incident. She is currently, we're in the defense's case in chief. We are listening to the doctors um, give their take. We listened to one doctor. Well, we listened to a couple people already, but right, 2 of her uncles, one doctor already that's diagnosed her with schizophrenia. Um, if you want my comments on that one, you can go back and watch the video previous to this one. Um, and then we're getting into another doctor. Not sure what this one is going to testify to or about, but I would assume it's going to have something again to do with mental health related issues. Hold on. Let me see what this dog is doing. Chewing on something. Hold on. Puppies, I tell you what. Okay. So, um, they, again, like I said, they're probably going to do something to the effect of some mental illness defense because they're going for a reason of insanity um, or insanity defense and trying to put it in the minds of the jury that during the incident, Nicole honestly and truly, delusionally thought that her mother was going to kill her. And so she had to kill her mother instead. Now, she did end up killing her stepfather a day or 2 prior to killing her mom. So I don't know what their defense on that one is, but as far as the mom goes, they're doing the insanity. Oh, but it did come out with this last doctor that their plea or their insanity defense was not always where they were going with it. So I don't know if we'll ever find out what they were. I think they were going for self defense, I think is what they were gonna try to do. But I don't know. But anyway, and also just a reminder, I don't specialize in anything legal wise. I'm just here to give my comments and my thoughts and, you know, commentary. And maybe if you learn something, it can be educational as well. I don't know. But feel free to let me know what you think in the comments below. Um, and then like and subscribe. and all of those good things. But very much so, like and subscribe. Okay, so we shall get it started in here. So to share the screen, put me down at the bottom, make it a big screen. Let a cheeky judge turn on, make it faster, and then turn on some closed captioning, and then we press play.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you want to stand up and take a stretch break while they're doing that, you're absolutely welcome to do that.
Thank you very much, Judge.
Packing up all her stuff because she had a lot of stuff.
All right, I believe the defense is ready with their next witness. I know it wasn't much of a stretch break and it wasn't a break where you have to go back into the jury room, but we're going to try to keep moving. Unless somebody, if you raise your hand because you absolutely need a break to go out of the courtroom, don't be shy, let me know. All right, I'll ask the defense to call your next witness.
The defense calls Dr. Charles Ewing.
Dr. Ewing, if you'll come forward to be sworn, sir, wherever you're comfortable, if you'll raise your right hand, thank you. You swear affirmative testimony you give in this proceeding will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
Yeah.
Thank you, doctor. If you'll follow the bailiff around the grant, please up to the witness chair. Please watch your step.
Oh, goodness.
When you get to the chair, go ahead.
He does not have as
Make yourself
much
comfortable.
stuff
That microphone
as
is
the other
adjustable. It
lady.
looks like it got moved up. You might need to bring it down. And if you've got any stuff you need to unpack, you're welcome to do so.
The chair adjust?
The chair does adjust, but I don't know exactly which lever it is.
Okay, thank you.
I've seen other witnesses figure it out, though.
Can you introduce yourself to the jury, please?
I'm Charles Patrick Ewing.
Doctor, let me have you bring that microphone down because some of the jury
Sorry.
sometimes it's just not amplified.
My name is Charles Patrick Ewing.
Tell me what you do for a living.
I'm a forensic psychologist.
Tell me what a forensic psychologist is.
I evaluate.
Please, like she doesn't say
individuals who are involved
please.
in primarily
Or
criminal
could
litigation
you?
With some civil litigation. In civil
Please.
litigation,
Like most attorneys are just like, hey, could you please explain to the jury what this is? Or could you please let me know what this is?
My practice has gone on for 30, 40 years.
Like she doesn't give a
Most
shit.
Recently, most of the work that I do is court-appointed work. I evaluate competency.
Which I get it
for the
because,
courts.
I mean,
And,
she already
I'm
knows
not sure
these
what
things
judicial
and this
district
is
it
just
is,
for the
but
jury's
it's,
benefit. But
Collier
still,
County, Lee County, Henry
you
County.
cannot be a bitch
Kind of down
about
in
it.
South Florida.
Yes,
Can you tell the jury your educational background in psychology?
yes, I have a bachelor's degree in psychology from Syracuse University and a doctoral degree from Cornell University,
And what year did you receive those degrees?
1971 and 1975.
Do you also happen to have a law degree?
I do.
And where did you get a law degree from?
I graduated from Harvard Law School in 1983.
And what was your purpose
Went
for
to
going to law
Harvard.
school? Just you're obviously get your psychology degree. What was the added degree in law school for?
Well, I've been a psychologist for a while, and I was a clinical psychologist. I worked in a hospital, worked in the emergency room, and I was the director of a children's program in the hospital, mental health center. I got involved in a lot of child abuse cases, mostly not as an expert initially, just as a reporter, mandated reporter. I saw a lot of child abuse, reported it, and ended up testifying, and then was at one point
That
called on
sucks.
as an expert witness to testify in a child abuse case. I testified for the state, and after that, I got more and more calls to testify in court, and I asked attorneys, asked the judges about going to law school and what they thought about it, and they all told me not to do it, and so I did it. But seriously,
seems to be
I thought
most
that I wanted to pursue
attorneys.
a career as a forensic
They
psychologist.
say, don't do
And
it.
do more work in the courts. And since then, I've been a forensic psychologist since 1983. And also since 1983, I've been a professor.
Now, is it fair to say that despite getting the law degree, I guess to kind of educate yourself in forensics, your primary focus or practice has been in the area of psychology?
Yes, I haven't done much in the way of legal practice. I did a little bit early on. And also at the end of law school, I had the opportunity to do some prosecutorial work, but I haven't really practiced. So I am admitted to the bar in New York State.
And the forensic psychologist you said you became in 1983, is that correct?
I would say, yeah, that's when I graduated from law school. That's when I would say from then on, pretty much all the work that I've done as a psychologist has been forensic psychology.
Now, as it relates to the areas of child abuse or battered child syndrome specifically, You had indicated you treated patients and worked in a hospital and dealt with victims of child abuse, which is kind of what piqued your interest. Can you
Yes.
tell the jury about any publications, literature that you yourself have authored or been a part of in those specific areas pertaining to child abuse or battered child syndrome?
Well, I've published 11 books and 60
Oh, wow.
to 70 articles and papers. I think probably a third of those deal in some manner with child abuse, child neglect, intrafamilial violence. Two of the books, well, three of the books deal specifically with one is called Kids Who Kill, one is called When Children Kill, and the third one is called Fatal Families, which deals with all kinds of homicides within families, adults who kill children, children who kill adults, adult children who kill their parents, sort of runs a gamut.
And as far as those publications, the books, the articles you wrote, all dealing with the topics that you just mentioned, are those all, I guess, recognized within your field?
Yeah, I would say a number of my books have been published by Oxford University Press, and others have been, well, they've sold well. I don't know if that counts. People, and the people in the field have read them. They've been well reviewed and cited.
With regard to your practice, do you practice in other jurisdictions besides Florida?
Yes, I'm licensed in New York and Florida, and I've testified in about a dozen other states. And I've done work in maybe half a dozen other states where I did not testify, but did forensic practice.
If you know, about how many times do you believe you've testified in your career in the area of psychology, child abuse, and or kids who kill parents?
Oh, about those issues in particular, I'd say maybe 50 times.
Throughout the country?
Yes.
Judge, at this time, if the state has any questions, Dr. Ewing.
No questions. Ready to proceed.
Dr. Ewing, when were you retained in this case?
I think it was sometime last year or early this year. I don't remember the exact date.
And what materials, and again, generally, were you provided and did you review in preparation for your work in this case?
Yeah, I have a list. The defendant's jail records, the child abuse allegations from when she was young, Florida Department of Children and Family records, again, when she was young. There was a big chunk of material that was labeled discovery, which included police reports and other items related to the homicides. Then there was a Texas family court file dealing with custody and visitation litigation. I saw, I don't know if it was complete, I don't think it's complete, but I saw a number of Nicole Nachtman's educational records. I saw a visitation that, this is a video of a visitation Nicole Nachtman had with her brother, video visitation after she was arrested and incarcerated. I saw the depositions of Angelica Henwood, David Lair, Eric Lair, George Lair, Hunter Lair, Jackie Roman, Laura Hessemer, and Joseph Carey. I reviewed videotapes of Dr. Lazaru's evaluation of the defendant. I reviewed a video of the defendant while she was in custody of the police, a video of a visitation she had. I may have already said this on 9/8/15, that was with her brother. Video of the defendant's visitations with her father.
Elvis with her brother.
And you asked me what I used for my opinion, or?
No, just what you reviewed, first materials.
Okay, those are the materials that I reviewed. After I gave you my opinion, I reviewed a 52-page report by Dr. Heidi.
Okay, so just so we're clear, the initial discovery materials or case materials you reviewed, and then interviewed Nicole Nachtman. You formulated your opinion as it relates to that, and then later were provided Dr. Heidi's report, Dr.
Yes.
Lazaro's deposition, evaluation from all the doctors involved after you had rendered your opinion.
Well, there was a deposition of Dr. Lazaro. I don't believe there was a deposition from Dr. Heidi,
Correct, just her report.
just a report.
When did you evaluate Nicole face to face? And if you could explain to the jury what you do when you have a mental status examination like you.
Yeah, I saw her on April 8th of this year. What I did was to take a detailed family, psychosocial, educational, occupational history from her mental health history. And I did a fairly standard mental status examination to determine what, if any, mental illnesses she was suffering, what, if any, symptoms she had experienced. And then I specifically questioned her at length about the events leading up to the homicides in this case and her state of mind at the time of both homicides.
Now, in the material that you mentioned you reviewed, what impressions did you have from Nicole's childhood records, the family court file, the custody battle, and things like that, that would be relevant to your opinion today?
Well, she got off the rocky start. Her parents, almost from the get-go, were litigating over custody, over visitation. One parent said the other parent sexually abused her. The other parent said, no, you sexually abused her. They were battling in court. There were just hundreds of pages of documents, complaints on either side, court documents or court orders, temporary court orders. There was a lot of litigation. It was clear that she, at least for the earliest years of her life, there was a lot of family turmoil and aggression, not physical aggression, but, well, there was some between the parents, but not toward her. But there was a lot of turmoil and I would say verbal aggression going on.
Why is that of significance in a case where there may be allegations of child abuse?
Well, because you're talking about.
In the early years, why is that so significant?
Well, it was significant to me because there are allegations.
Wait, time, hold it.
I'm sorry.
Do you want the break for the restroom?
All right, any restroom break, so we will absolutely take a short break. Do not discuss the case among yourselves with anyone else. Do not do any research related to the case and avoid any exposure to any reports of the case outside the courtroom. We'll just take a very short break until anybody needs to send you all back there. Anybody needs to use the restroom, we'll bring you back. All rise for the jury. Jury's exited, everyone may be seated. Doctor, it's gonna be a short break. You can step down if you want to use the restroom. I think you're welcome to sit there.
Good, I'll just relax.
If you're comfortable there, you can stay there. We're still 5:45?
Let me ask Dr. Ewing about it. Come in and get it confirmed. We believe at this point the alternate needs to be put in her place.
Okay.
We agree.
Yeah,
Because Friday at noon is, and she didn't tell us. This would have been
right,
different.
no,
if we
I
had
agree, but we'll
said
call her, we'll talk to her, because maybe she has some flexibility, maybe she's changed things, but if not, and she is of the opinion she's gotta be out of here at 12, I agree with you, because we don't want a jury deliberation going over and then a concern, and now we've released alternates and they've been deliberating.
Correct. So we agree that the alternate is in her place if she still has that obligation.
Okay, all right. I'm gonna wait
there's a
until
jury
tomorrow to
matter.
inquire with
Yes.
her.
Thank you.
Oh, no.
Oh, I know. No, I think I was the first one to say that when I brought that up.
And our client, I've already spoken to our client, she realizes that we need to make that replacement.
Well, maybe, we'll see.
Did you bring clothes and stuff to sit over?
Yes. we're ready.
I got a little bit. I'm in my car, my emergency stash.
Let's bring them in.
All rise, jury entering.
All members of the jury are present and seated. Everyone else may be seated at this time. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, welcome back. First question to you is, did anybody have any exposure to the case, discuss the case, or do any research to the case during that last short break? All right, let the record reflect no hands are raised. I'm sure you all are always wondering, how long is this judge going to keep me here today? I just want to let you all rest at ease that we're only going to go up till 5:30. We're going to release you at 5:30 today. We'll come back and pick up. We're not going to finish this witness. We'll come back and finish this witness tomorrow morning. But we're going to pick up where we left off with the direct examination.
Thank you, Judge. Dr. Ewing, I think you had just indicated or explained kind of what a mental status examination is, and that's in fact what you did with Nicole in April.
Yes.
I believe I had also asked you about the records that you reviewed with regard to the family court file, the custody file, and kind of
From the
what your
record?
overall impressions about Nicole's early years in that battle were, and I believe you gave us that opinion.
Yes.
Was there anything additional that we didn't cover? Specifically, I want to talk about the psychological evaluation that Dr. Anderson had done within that file. Without telling us the exact contents of the evaluation or what may have been said, can you tell me just what your overall impressions of that were from the family court file?
Yeah, Dr. Anderson did a court-ordered evaluation of Nicole and her parents and reported to the court a lengthy report. But the bottom line was that she was extremely concerned about the psychological consequences for Nicole Nachtman if her parents continued to behave the way they had been behaving toward each other.
Did the evaluation record how old Nicole was at the time of that evaluation took place?
I think she was about 3 years old, maybe 4, but 3 or 4.
What is your understanding from your review of the custody file and the family court file and all the records as to when you believe Nicole Nachtman last had contact with her biological father, or at what age the family court file kind of resolved and Miriam Dean obtained custody?
Well, her father, my understanding is her father had custody of her early on, so or more of her life, and that during this custody litigation, her mother secured custody, so it would have been preschool age, and the father had, my understanding is that he had visitation, but that the mother thwarted, at least he claimed that she thwarted the visitation. She claimed he didn't show up. There were more battles, more custody and visitation battles. And at some point, he was just gone from the scene.
And you believe that was again around that preschool age, 3 or so?
Maybe 4 years, yeah, around there somewhere.
I had asked you, and I don't know if we got to that because I know we just went on a break, but I'd asked you about what that type of turmoil in someone like Nicole's life at such a young age, what type of impact that can have.
Well, it varies. My belief is that it had a tremendous impact on her development.
And tell me why that is.
Well, because I don't want to jump the gun too far, but I agree with Dr. Heidi that Nicole suffers from schizophrenia. And schizophrenia, we know from years of study that it has both a biological and a psychosocial basis. The biological basis, in order to become schizophrenic, you have to have some genetic biological predisposition toward it. We also know that most people, well, I can't say most, many people who have that predisposition never develop full-blown schizophrenia. Unfortunately, in this case, that was only the beginning of what would become pretty much a lifetime of abuse for this young woman. And it's my belief that psychological abuse started early on preschool, continued right up until around the time of these unfortunate killings. And those two factors, this underlying biological factor plus the stress of being in an abusive, dysfunctional family all those years, is what would cause her to be so severely mentally ill.
Did the bonding break from her biological father, Ronald, in her early childhood years have any effect on her?
I think it did. I can't say for absolute certainty, but seeing the two of them interact together more recently.
And you're referring to jail visits of
Yes,
videos that you
right,
observed?
Yeah, it seemed to me that they had a strong bond at one time in childhood. And that seemed to be reflected in the records too. The family court records indicated that both of these parents had a loving, caring relationship with their daughter. And his relationship with the daughter was, whether it was his fault or the court's fault or mom's fault, for some reason, it was just cut off for many, many, many years.
And in fact, is it your understanding that Mr. Nachtman did not reunite after her arrest for this case?
That's right. That's my understanding.
Did you also have an opportunity to review school records?
Yes.
What did the records reflect that you reviewed as to how many schools Nicole attended in her childhood?
It's got to be at least 9, and I want to say maybe even a dozen. I can't remember, but it's somewhere in that vicinity.
9 to 12.
Yes.
How does that type of instability in moving schools, if you go to school from age 5 to 18, because you graduate, that's 13 years. If in fact it's 9 or it's 12, how does that instability affect a child's development or a child's ability to make meaningful relationships and connections?
Well, obviously it makes it extremely difficult to have any kind of extended peer relationships. But some kids can deal with that. I've seen a number of, quote, Army brats, for example, who have moved over the course of their life and attended many schools. Sometimes they can deal with that, but not somebody who's in an abusive, tumultuous situation like this young woman was experiencing throughout her life.
Was
But
Nicole,
again,
like,
do
termed it a
you
typical
know
Army brat who could
exactly
deal, or in your
the
opinion, based on
effect
your
that
review of the
it was
record,
having
did that instability
on
and
her
constant movement
at that
between schools
time?
affect Nicole?
Oh, yeah,
Do
and
you
I
have
discussed it with
any
her in some
record
length, and it did, clearly did.
saying
It all on those
this
moves.
is how
but,
the child is
clearly the moves
acting?
didn't help.
This
They
is
made it
what
much
I
more difficult for
observed
her.
from the
Was there
child.
anything within the school records,
Child could
specifically
be
because you mentioned the
completely
3rd grade,
oblivious
that
anything
you
else
relied on
happening
with
around
regard
her.
to observations teachers or school psychologists may
Mom
have
and
made
Dad could be
of
going
Nicole in the
through
3rd grade?
Yeah,
the
there
most shit
was an
ever.
evaluation, psychological evaluation done
The child
on
could be
Nicole
completely
when she was in the
oblivious.
3rd grade because the teachers were saying that she was peer relations, difficulty getting along, having academic problems, that sort of thing. And I made some notes on it if I could refer to those.
Yeah, that'll refresh your memory.
The psychologist,
Ah,
she thought she might have attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and that I believe she recommended some treatment for her.
Is that third grade evaluation or the psychological evaluation significant to you in terms of the onset of Nicole's mental illness?
Yes.
Tell me what's significant
Well,
about that.
what I've seen over the course of my work and what's documented in the literature is that when we look back on a patient's development, a particular patient who suffered
Okay,
from
this is
schizophrenia or some other major mental
first-
illness, there are usually signs dating back into early childhood. They may not have been picked up, they may not have been recognized at the time,
Type of
but in
diagnosis.
retrospect, you can look back and you can almost always see that there were signs that this person was different, was peculiar, was acting out, had some kind of problems. And third grade seems about right, in my experience, for people to start noticing those sorts of things. Kindergarten, first, second grade, there's not so much of an emphasis put on behavior and there's not so much emphasis placed on
That is seriously
Behavior like this.
early onset.
but once you start
schizophrenia.
getting into more academic issues,
Seriously
more,
early.
serious educational issues, third, fourth, fifth grade, then you start to see these kind of referrals made and evaluations done. That's been my experience.
You had mentioned that within
My
those school
experience,
records
I
for
don't think
Nicole
I've
that you
ever had
observed, that there
somebody
had been a
that young.
recommendation that some follow-up treatment or
Not saying
therapy
that
or
it doesn't
something be done.
happen.
Yes.
In
I'm
any of the
just
records you
saying, in
reviewed,
my
family
experience, I've
accounts,
not had
the
anybody that
custody
young.
battle file, anything indicate that Nicole Nachtman or Miriam Beans ever followed up with that recommendation by the school?
No, to my knowledge, they didn't.
Did you also
Because
have
the
an
only
opportunity to
treatment
review
for
school records
ADHD
where
is
Nicole spent some time at
medication.
a boarding school called the Air Academy?
Yes.
What, if any,
But it
indication in
can
those
be
school records did you
managed
see
without
with
it.
regard to teacher observations or reports
Therapy.
about Nicole's behaviors or bullying or anything like that?
Well, they reported that she was a victim of bullying, that she showed odd behavior and students picked on her. And she
These kids are assholes.
responded by withdrawing, but also by making threats to other students. And it was quite a bit of concern. And from what I could gather, the school pretty much demanded that she have some kind of evaluation and treatment. And I don't recall it. I heard Dr. Heidi testify that she got some kind of evaluation done. I don't recall that, but I know she didn't get any treatment.
That was gonna be my next
No.
question. Did you review in any of the records, despite teacher concerns while Nicole was attending the Air Academy, or reports about bullying, or maybe even her response to the bullying, that in fact any follow-up counseling or treatment was obtained?
So
by
she
her
was
mother or
getting
any guardian
bullied.
for that
She
matter?
threatened
No,
the
there wasn't.
bitches who were bullying her.
And just so the
And she
jury
got in
can
trouble.
understand a time frame, we talked about the third grade
Sounds about right.
school psychological evaluation. What age or grades do you believe Nicole was attending the Air Academy, if you remember?
I think it was 7th and 8th or 8th and 9th, somewhere in that vicinity.
And 7th or 8th grade, a child is usually about how old? We can put an age on it.
13, 14. Early adolescence.
You had indicated that you also, in the materials you reviewed, in addition to the school records, the psychological evaluations, you reviewed deposition testimony or recollection and recitations of family history from family members, like the Uncle Eric Lear, George Lear, these people who were kind of around Nicole for part of her childhood. Did you review
Yes.
those materials?
Yes.
And what was your overall impression from those materials as to whether any family members were reporting seeing signs of an onset of a possible mental illness or issues Nicole may have been having? Even her brother Joey Carey. Anything about those materials that you reviewed to indicate not only is the school reporting issues, but so is the family, or at least noticing the family?
Well, yeah, her brother seemed to view it as somewhere in the middle of her childhood that she just changed. That she went from being an outgoing, charming, wonderful kid to kind of withdrawn, depressed, and difficult child, difficult to relate to. So that's one thing. 2 or 3 of her family members mentioned over time that she was withdrawn, that in fact, one of them talked about her appearing to talk to herself. And I believe another spoke about how, I think it was her cousin, somebody about maybe her age or maybe a little bit older. Trying to think of what his name was. The young man,
David Lear, does that sound right?
yeah, I think that's right. That she changed, that they used to do things together and I guess play together, and that changed, and that she became increasingly distant and difficult.
And I apologize, it may have been Hunter Lear.
Oh,
Does that sound right?
Yeah, I
Okay.
think that's right. I'm
That would
sorry.
have been Eric's son.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So that's her cousin, I believe.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, with regard to the reports by the relatives or the family members who observed, again, these changes in Nicole issues, did the records reflect, A, that they appeared to have reported their concerns to Miriam Deans, the mother, at all?
I don't think they did. I mean, they may have discussed it at some level, but
Or that any follow-up treatment or counseling or interventions were done at that point?
no, nothing was done.
So you have from the school records, counselors and teachers reporting observations about Nicole
Yes.
that are somewhat concerning or
I would say very concerning, especially the ones from the Air Academy.
and then reports from her own family members that possibly they're observing some changes in Nicole, and nothing in you reviewed that there were ever any counseling or interventions done by the mother.
That's right.
What, if any, evidence did you see both in the records, family accounts, and your evaluation of Nicole to indicate that there was evidence that she was physically abused? And I'm going to break them up individually, but let's start with physical abuse.
Nicole indicated to me that on several different occasions, her mother punched her, slapped her, kicked her, stomped her, and pinched her, grabbed her, pulled her hair. I think those are the main things that she described.
Anything within the records, were there like police reports or arrest reports on behalf of Nicole listed as a victim anywhere, anything like that in any of the
I
records?
didn't see anything like
Okay.
that.
So the physical abuse would be things Nicole reported to you.
Yes.
What about the psychological abuse?
Well, what she reported was a long history of her mother yelling, swearing, condemning, demeaning, swearing at her, calling her names, vulgar names, and extreme amount of control, demanding, for example, that she lose a certain amount of weight, telling her that she was fat, that she was ugly, that her clothing was ugly, putting her down at really kind of critical points like high school graduation, which is was a big deal. And I guess it's a big deal to anyone. It was a big deal to me to graduate from high school.
What did Nicole report occurred at graduation in terms of physical, I'm sorry, psychological abuse?
Yeah, that her mother told her that she was ashamed of her, basically, and that she hadn't lived up to her expectations, and that she didn't like the clothing that she was wearing, that she didn't appear appropriately dressed for the graduation.
In addition to Nicole's reports of psychological abuse, did you view anywhere in the records where that would have been corroborated by either other members
Stop
of the
saying
family
record.
or anyone else that as far as documents you reviewed?
Her brother
Record.
talked a bit about it. He said he'd never seen any physical abuse, but he did talk about how his sister Nicole had a difficult relationship with the mom, and I think he talked about controlling issues. And he also talked about some abuse that he'd suffered at the hands of the mom, Mrs. Deans.
Judgment approach?
Yes.
With regard to the psychological abuse that you just testified to was not only documented by her brother Joseph, but also Nicole relaying that information to you.
And some records. I mean, for example, there are records, medical records about the LASIK surgery and I think about liposuction.
Why are those significant, or what about those constitute a form of abuse in your opinion?
Well, the mother is basically unhappy with the way the child looks. So she wants the child to undergo what some people would regard as significant surgery, liposuction, in order to make her look more like she wants her to look. I consider that to be psychologically abusive, especially when the child doesn't want it. And same thing with the LASIK surgery. The mom wanted the daughter to have LASIK surgery. The daughter didn't want it. She was afraid of the surgery. Mother insisted. They got there. The records indicate that Nicole was interviewed by some staff member, a nurse, or some other person, and she raised concerns about it. And then it was discussed.
Mom said she was an ungrateful
But
bitch.
And the LASIK was more of an appearance thing, was your understanding,
Again,
so she
yeah.
didn't have to wear
my
glasses.
mother didn't like the way she looked with glasses. But all that's kind of part of a control that I would see as psychologically abusive.
Any other
Said she
instances
was
of
an
psychological
ungrateful
abuse
bitch
that you
because
can
she didn't
recall
number one-
that either Nicole reported to you, family members reported, or that you reviewed within the records?
Oh, there were multiple occasions where the mother swore at her, called her names, called her fucking bitch, motherfucker.
Oh my God.
I mean, those seem to be two of the pet names that she would frequently use.
The pet names.
There's also an incident
I don't
where
think they're pet names.
I believe
necessarily.
the mother was engaging in what I would consider to be gaslighting, which is maybe trying to make you feel like you're a little crazy. Nicole was on the telephone with her, and her stepfather was supposed to be coming to pick her up at school, and the mother didn't say anything to her. She was talking to her as if she were at home, and then she pulls up, the mother pulls up.
So the mother had lied to Nicole and said your stepdad was coming, which
Right.
would have been Bob.
Yes.
But in fact, the mom shows up.
And then, and played it out right to the bitter end, till shortly before she got there.
And why is that significant?
Well, because as I said, I see it as kind of gaslighting. It's like Nicole is very rigid in her thinking. You tell her something, and that's the way it is. And her mother told her, Bob is coming to pick you up. Bob's coming to pick you up. And so when her mother shows up after having just spoken to her and saying, Bob's coming to get you, she was surprised, and it kind of knocked her off her game, so to speak.
Let me ask you a question because we're on the topic of abuse, both physical, psychological, in this example you just raised. You indicated earlier that you also watched the video evaluations by the state's doctor, Dr. Emily Lazaro. Is that
Yes.
correct? And in fact, those were videotaped and the entire evaluation was videotaped.
Yes, it was.
Did Nicole report that same incident about the Bob, if you remember, to Dr. Lazaro?
I don't remember
Okay.
if she reported many other instances of psychological abuse to Dr. Lazaro.
When she reported the instances of psychological abuse, physical abuse to Dr. Lazaro in those video evaluations, what do you recall Nicole's demeanor, reaction to describing those events as she's talking about them?
She was just acting as if it was happening right there. I mean, she was crying, sobbing, moaning, curling up, rocking. It was a very emotional reaction. And very current, I would say, almost present. It looked to me almost like she was reliving those moments.
And when you watch the video evaluations by the state doctor, those occurred this year in 2019.
Yes.
And the reports of abuse, both psychological, physical, or just in general, the treatment of her mother, she's recalling things from her childhood, correct?
Yeah, as early as the third grade.
But as she's describing them in 2019, she is still having an emotional reaction to those events.
Yeah, in fact, in one case, she's saying, sorry, 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 as if she's apologizing
To the doctor,
to her mother.
to her mother.
That's how I took it.
Judge, it's 5:30, I don't know.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, we're gonna break for today. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll send you home now at 5:30. We'll pick up at 9 a.m. Please do not do any research related to the case. Please do not talk about the case amongst yourselves or anyone else, and please avoid any exposure to the case or media reports of the case. All rise for the drill.
Judge, it's
Your
5:30.
executive, everyone may be seated. Doctor, you may step down. Sorry about that, but to the extent that you need me to, I'm ordering you to be back here tomorrow
Thank you.
a little bit before 9 a.m.
That's helpful with me.
All right, not a problem. People don't usually like me to order them to do things.
Judge, before we leave for the day, I want to bring up an issue that just came up with the associate.
No, Doctor, I'm sure you know it. Please don't discuss your testimony with anyone unless all the attorneys are present. Thank you. Welcome back, Doctor. You can come on down to the witness stand. I'm not sure we have something else to discuss, but at least that witness chair is probably more comfortable than that hard bench. So you might as well get yourself situated and comfortable.
Thank you.
Again, sorry for having to bring you back. Thank you for being here
I
today.
understand.
Judge, I think we have to address the state's issue at the end of yesterday because there are in the.
The gun.
Yes. Judge, I tell the court I look for the specific issue in relation to, an insanity case or a statement made to a state doctor. Didn't find anything. However, I put some cases on the bench that I believe are now due, what court must do. And these deal with when a defendant, let's say, wants to testify and the statement or confession's been suppressed, and the state wants to use that statement for impeachment. There's certain things
You
that
can
the
use
court,
it for impeachment.
not always, you have to make a finding that it's voluntary.
Not always.
To Nolan, which is 346 Southern 2nd, 1020. You go to page 3 of the opinion in the right-hand column. Basically, in this case, the statement was suppressed for violation of Miranda. The defendant basically got on the stand and lied or committed perjury. And the court went on to say that you can't just circumvent Miranda, and obviously a defendant can't use the fact that a statement was suppressed to get on the stand and commit perjury. But in that right-hand column, footnote 1024, at the very least, the court means that the statements must be voluntarily given. When the state, in order to impeach a defendant's credibility, chooses to present evidence of a defendant's incriminating statements which are inconsistent with trial testimony of the defendant and which are inadmissible in the case in chief, which is what we have here, because of a failure in that case to give Miranda, the statements must be shown to be voluntarily made before they may be admitted. I also cite to Willacy, which is 640 Southern 2nd, 1079. That's a Supreme Court of Florida's case. If you look at footnote 5, the first page of that opinion, defendant's inculpatory statements can be admitted for impeachment purposes, but the state must, by a preponderance of the evidence, show that the statement was voluntarily made.
But in all those cases, that's the statement that was made to police that was suppressed. Is there anything, and I guess the best analogy that I came up with is here. Had she confessed to the police at the Florida State Police Department, whether it was a violation of whether they didn't read Miranda or whether they read Miranda or whether she invoked and they still asked her what happened and a legal conclusion, well, that's what happened with the gun. I'm throwing in something different because it's part of my analogy. Had she confessed, not talked about the gun, but had she talked about shooting her mother and Bob, and that was clearly suppressed because they violated her Miranda rights. What about the fact that she said it to her brother on the phone? Wouldn't that still come in? The statement to somebody else?
She didn't tell her brother about the gun in this scenario. I would agree with you.
My analogy, though.
But if it's the same statement and it's coming in a different way, sure, that's not what we have here. If she had told the cops about the gun in violation of Miranda and that gets suppressed, then she tells the brother in a separate conversation about the gun, I'd submit to the court that the statement to the brother is admissible. That's not what we have here. The only mention of a gun is to police after she asks for a lawyer. And the case law is clear.
I don't intend to let that in. I don't think that's what they're asking. I absolutely don't intend to allow her statement to the police about the gun in.
Correct, but what you're now going to allow is a doctor to testify that when she's talking about the events and asking her questions, my client during that evaluation isn't thinking that's been suppressed. Am I supposed to say yes? Am I supposed to say no? She tells Dr. Lazaro the whole scenario about the homicide. While all that's relevant to insanity, what she does with the gun after is not. And it's been suppressed. And so now the jury hears this statement that's been suppressed during a compulsory examination by a state expert that she must abide by and follow, because that wasn't her choice to make those statements to Dr. Lazaro. I certainly haven't elicited them through my defense experts. And so it's a compulsory court-ordered examination by a state expert where she can't say, no, I'm not going to answer that, or no, I'm not going to cooperate with the evaluation. It's the same thing. And the case law is clear that a finding of when a statement is suppressed and
let the judge talk. Judge, tell her to shut up.
Apologizing into these cases, a finding of voluntariness must be made.
You have my attention with the fact it's a compulsory exam. But I want to go back to my analogy a minute because I'm still a little confused. It might be because I haven't had my coffee yet. If she had said to her brother that she threw the gun in the lake, would it be your position that it's not admissible because that same statement to police was suppressed?
No. But that's not what we have here. So the jury has not heard anything about the gun until Dr. Lazaro, during a compulsory court-ordered state examination, gets to say it.
Yeah.
And it's not voluntary. My other concern, judges, we are now approaching basically trampling Nicole Nachtman's
everything else that she
This jury has
said.
now heard she invoked. That's completely impermissible, and I objected. They now heard she asked for a lawyer, and it was because we wanted the totality
I can't let that go without, it was at the defense suggestion that even came up to let the jury hear.
under the position that we were not going to be able to get any of the statement.
When it
So
was
now we
suggested,
have,
I hadn't ruled on it.
all I'm saying is
For the record to be clear.
the Constitution is in place for a reason. They've now heard
Let
she
all
invoked,
of her other
which
stuff
is
come in,
never
but you don't want to
admissible.
let
In
this come
circumstance,
in.
I understand the court's ruling, the totality of the circumstances. If I want the statement in, they get to hear all of it. Now we're going to allow a statement that was suppressed, that Detective Messer himself told Nicole Nachtman and has testified previously that that statement was inadmissible, and I know it, and therefore I asked her because I wanted to know where the gun was for safety. Clearly, I didn't get to ask Detective Messer about that. Did you tell her it was inadmissible? Did you tell her that anything about the gun? None of that's been elicited. So now Dr. Lazaro gets to testify about a court-ordered compulsory examination that my client had to cooperate with and answer questions about. It's a violation of what I believe the case law stands for in regards to when a statement is suppressed, a finding of voluntariness.
You've said enough that I'm uncomfortable and I'm concerned. That's my position, Mr. Terry. I mean,
We are not,
it's got a lot of legal baggage with it. Is it really worth the risk?
Judge, absolutely. First of all, the statement to, it is a specific statement to the specific detective who
Why
violated
did he
Miranda.
tell us what
The
he's
purpose of
thinking?
suppression.
You've
The main
said
purpose of
enough that
suppression,
I
if
am
you go back all the
concerned.
way to the case law, is to punish police conduct that's inappropriate, correct? So it's to punish the police. So yes, Detective Messer, the statement to Detective Messer, out. But now they have placed an affirmative defense. Okay, they're the ones who brought this defense forward. They're the ones who are claiming she was insane. They're the ones, by claiming insanity, they basically waive those rights and allow us to have a doctor examine her by law. So it's not compulsory, it's by law. We have the right to have a doctor examine. They're the ones who are
That's
bringing
true.
it forward. They are voluntarily bringing this defense forward. She told not only my doctor, but the other doctors as well as what she did with the gun. That goes to her insanity. The fact that she got rid of that gun, got rid of evidence, goes to show consciousness of
Fair.
guilt. It's a very
So
strong
not
piece of
only
evidence
did
as
she
far as
tell
the
their
insanity
doctor, but she
It's
told
a-
every
She
other
conceded that
doctor.
wrong, though, when we look at, that she knew that what she did was wrong.
Yes, sir, that's not the problem here.
Didn't Dr. Heidi concede that?
Well, Dr. Ewing, does not concede that.
I do.
Okay, well, his deposition, he did not.
So
His
they
deposition
can
said, I
see that.
can't make
Again,
it.
I ask you the question, is it worth the risk? It has so much legal baggage to it. The only thing it supports is a prong of a test that they concede that they're not contesting. Do you really want me to let that in? Do you really
Judge,
want
I'm
me to
not
let that
scared
in?
of it. I am not scared of it because I believe the law is completely on the side of this.
You know, and in the past, I wish the Attorney General was sitting at the table with you, because then down the road, I get these appeals from stuff and they concede it. Things that were argued to me by an assistant state attorney that they're not scared of, and then it goes up on appeal and the Attorney General concedes it.
Judge, what about every other statement she made?
No offense to the Attorney General.
Judge, I'm just gonna ask you, what about every other statement that was made to Dr. Lazaro? These are all post-Miranda statements. Everything that was made to Dr. Lazaro was post-Miranda. Everything that was made to the other doctors was post-Miranda, and it was voluntary. She gave it up. She explained what her mindset was. All of that evidence would not be admissible. It would be violation of Miranda, and it would immediately come back on appeal. So all of those statements are separate and apart now because they have waived all of that by putting forth this defense.
I don't necessarily disagree with you, but in this, I mean, she was, this particular statement to the police was suppressed. And in combination with that, she was promised by the police that this statement about where the gun is, because of the safety to the public, could not be used against her. So on appeal, they're going to be arguing that that's still in her mind. She was promised by the police that because the safety of that issue regarding the gun could not be used against her when she said it. So
Just
that
don't
carries
use it.
over. She's saying it to everybody because the police promised her that it couldn't be used against her.
Judge, let's say this happens.
So
Let's
don't
say
use it.
She said, I told
Just let it
she
go.
had the gun. Then she's in jail.
Let
later.
it
And she talks
go.
to one of the inmates and says, you know what I did? I got rid of the gun. And she says it voluntarily to that jailhouse inmate.
It comes in.
It comes in.
It comes in if she told her brother. They admit that. It comes in if she told her
So, and
brother.
that's exactly what we're dealing with here. She voluntarily said to this doctor, I threw the gun in the lake. That's a voluntary statement to another witness.
As part of the compulsory medical exam. The word
No,
compulsory.
it wasn't
is in
compulsory.
there.
Judge, it's not compulsory for Dr. Ewing. They are ones who hired Dr. Ewing to come in and ask her these questions.
I have purposely not elicited anything pertaining to the gun, neither in Dr. Heidi's testimony, nor did I plan to in Dr. Ewing's, because of the court's ruling on the suppression. So those statements are not being elicited by my doctors at all.
Judge, that's fine for her
On
to not listen,
purpose.
but I can't because she said it to him voluntarily. I didn't compel Dr. Ewing.
He's
to
not
go
gonna
and
let
talk to
it
her and
in.
Find out what she had to say.
This
They're the
judge
ones who are
is
presenting
very
this
weary
defense.
of
They're the ones who have the burden of
appeals.
proof on it. They're the
He
ones who
doesn't
are
like
providing
his
these witnesses.
cases
I should be
to
able
be
to
appealed.
cross-examine these witnesses about anything that goes to her state of mind. Anything she voluntarily
gets
said
very
about her state
scary.
of mind. And the gun goes directly to her state of mind.
About it. He doesn't like it.
Whether I think that it's a risk, I said I'm concerned. I said it has a lot of legal baggage with it. I shouldn't have to explain that. I think that, but at the end of the day, I don't see any legal reason to suppress it at this time. The courts may disagree with me down the road. I think it's a risk. I caution the state. I'm ruling that it can come in, but I caution you to think about it, to think about whether you really want to do it, whether you need it, because I'm concerned. But concern is not enough for me to rule. I don't rule with, the way that I feel about something. I rule about what I believe the law to be. But I think that there are certainly some appellate issues that are going to follow this if there's a conviction in this case. There's no question about that.
Understood.
All right.
Oh, well, damn. Mr. Judgement, you
I'm letting it
surprised
under
me.
the same
He usually doesn't do that.
reasoning that if it had been made to the brother, it would come in. I understand that you distinguished that it wasn't made to the brother. You acknowledge that it would come in if it was made to the brother, and your position is that it came in a compulsory medical.
But
exam.
technically, it
However,
wasn't a
it apparently
compulsory
comes in
one
in statements to
because they
their
brought
experts as
her-
well. So that's why I'm letting it in.
So I'm just gonna add at this point that, and you said it at the sidebar, that you look at, outside the scope of direct broadly, but I'm gonna lodge that objection on behalf of, our client at this time, because we've intentionally not elicited that type of information. Mr. Terry told you yesterday he was doing it through Dr. Lazaro because he sees what you're getting ready to do. He now switches to Dr. Ewing, and the record should be clear that that's what's going on here, because it's outside the scope of direct, period.
Direct's not over though.
She's not gonna elicit it. She's an officer of the court and she's made that representation to you. Now, do we have to strategize now and figure out if we want to bring it up? I'll say my recommendation to Ms. Hersey's going to say absolutely not, because at some point it's going to become clear in this record that because of the things and the tactics and the convincing that the state has done, we're getting put into these positions where we have a lot of things that we're not going to be put in a position that we've waived our appellate. In other words, we're not going to be in a
I hear
position where we're waiving.
I certainly understand you need to perfect the record and preserve these things for appeal. Number one, the direct is not over, and you have the advantage now of knowing what my ruling on that legal issue that came up. I wish it had come up earlier. But as far as scope, this doctor's talking about her insanity, the prongs of insanity, and things that she did or reported to him that relate to those, I don't believe are beyond the scope. I do again want to add to my caution to the state that the only thing that it appears that this evidence would support is a prong that they concede. So that's just,
But that also
something
point
to
out
consider.
when we,
that's not a reason for me to rule that it doesn't come in, but it's
Wonder if
something I
that
think
was
that the
a
state should
plan
weigh
for them
in
to be
determining
like,
whether they want to elicit evidence that has
maybe
baggage,
we
legal
should
baggage,
bring
that
it
has
up
valid issues that only
before
support
they do
a
and get out
prong
in front
that
of
the
it,
defense
and then the
experts
state just be
concede.
like,
I don't know why
"Eh,
we
we
wanna do
weren't
that.
gonna
If
talk
you wanna
about it
do I'm giving you
anyway."
the green light to do it.
I also want to point out, Judge, that you instructed both parties to do research, which I did, and the state has cited no case law that this is permissible.
I understand.
But I
I
will ask for permission to speak to Mr. Ewing on this very limited issue. So we have not prepared for that because I was not planning on eliciting it.
You may. I did my own research and I listened to the argument and I made the ruling that I think is the correct.
Have a moment to
That's
maybe go out.
You wanna
very
step up?
strategic of the state if that was the
Approximately
case.
how long do you think you need?
Judge, no more than 10 minutes.
All right, we'll take a 10-minute break.
Because if that was the case, that was very strategic
The coming in.
to kind of throw them off there.
The reason it was a concern for me is because,
Wait for Mr. Scott. First,
well, Ms. Holtz here, I just want to express the court what we talked about and what I believe we've potentially agreed on.
Oh.
At the deposition, because today, while we were sitting here having this argument, Dr. Ewing said, I do believe she was wrong. But at the deposition, he said, I'm not sure she did, but I'm also not sure she didn't. That's what I was concerned about with the wrongfulness portion. He never made a full opinion. I asked him and told him, if he's willing to state today that yes, at the time she was wrong, I will not bring it and I will agree to keep out the whole guns.
all right, I appreciate it, because I planned on asking you, isn't that the easier thing, just to ask him if he agrees to that prong?
I absolutely, but during the deposition that I took of him, he would not agree conclusively to the wrong. He said, I can't say she knew it was wrong, I can't say she didn't. I just, if he's willing to say today, if his opinion is now.
Then you're not gonna go into anything
Then I won't go
on the
into
gun.
then I won't go into it.
All right, well, that's up to you all, and you know how I ruled, so, it's up to you.
Well, there you go.
Is the state ready?
Yes, one other issue, Judge. Well, I guess we can wait till after the meeting gets started.
Yeah, let's get started. Let's get the jury out here, because they probably wonder why I asked them to be here at 9:45 every morning if we don't get started till 10. Is the defense ready?
Yes, sir.
All right, let's bring in the jury. Again, thank you, doctor. Thank you for your patience.
No problem, Your Honor.
You're gonna ask them though on direct, so they'll have the benefit of knowing before the cross.
Judge, I'm going to ask him about his opinion as to prong B. I'm not eliciting any statements about the gun because it's my position they're not admissible.
No, I understand that.
I'm going to ask him about his opinion as to prong, the insanity altogether.
Man, we don't have
Excuse
to
me,
be
everyone
so
else, excuse me,
fucking
ladies and
bitchy.
gentlemen, the jury, good morning. Welcome back.
Dear.
My first question is, did anybody have any exposure to the case outside of the courtroom, discuss the case amongst yourselves or with anyone else, or do any research related to the case by show of hands? Let the record reflect their notion of hands. Again, thank you all very much. Again, welcome back. We are going to pick up where we left off. Oh, and additionally, I apologize for the late start. I take full responsibility for all delays in getting
He
started on
does.
time. Is the
It
defense
was
ready?
all
Yes,
his
sir.
All right,
fault.
witness
It
is still on the
wasn't
stand from yesterday, or
definitely
back on the stand from
wasn't
yesterday,
this
still under oath.
sassy, frassy
Morning, Dr.
lady's
Ewing.
fault.
I think
She was
yesterday when we
being real
wrote,
bitchy.
we had, or were discussing, evidence of psychological abuse that Nicole had experienced at the hands of her mother. Is that
I don't know
recollection
what the
about
hell
where
we were
left off?
talking about
Okay.
yesterday.
And you had
I just
testified to
watched
various
it.
instances, both in the records, family reports, and Nicole herself as to that abuse.
Yes.
And I think one of the last things we asked, or we discussed yesterday, was the video evaluations by the state doctor, Dr. Lazaro. Did you have an opportunity to view those?
Yes.
And with regard to Nicole's recitation of these instances of both physical and emotional abuse, psychological abuse, as she's telling the state doctor, what were your observations about her demeanor, her reaction in those videos, which occurred not even a month or two ago?
She was sobbing. She was hysterical. She couldn't control her emotions.
And when I say a few
This
months
is a
ago, talking
recap.
about, that was
Said
still
this
her
already.
reaction in 2019.
Yes.
And were some of the instances that she's describing to Dr. Lazaro things from her childhood as well as up and through college?
Yes.
What does that tell you that still in 2019, from a psychologist's perspective, that Nicole's reaction is so dramatic and sobbing and just uncontrollable crying? What does that tell you?
Well, it tells me a couple of things. One is that the trauma was great. The trauma was severe. The trauma that accrued to her as a result of the psychological and physical abuse she suffered at the hands of her mother. Beyond that, it tells me that she remains severely mentally ill, which, to be honest, would be expected. Her mental health has deteriorated in recent years up to the time of the homicide and has continued to deteriorate. She's able to function because she's in a very controlled environment in jail where her every need is met and where, as Dr. Lazaro pointed out to her in her examination, there's no stress for her.
And I want to get to that now. What evidence did you see before we get to her time that she's been in jail, where whether Ms. Nachtman was capable of normal adult life activities? What evidence in both the records and from Ms. Nachtman did you see in that
Some
regard?
people
She was not
really
able to
thrive
function
in a prison
as a
atmosphere.
21-year-old person should, functioning more like a preteen, maybe an early teenager at best. She wasn't washing her clothes. She was sleeping on a bare mattress. She was found sleeping in the hallway. She was found sleeping in the bathroom of her dormitory. She had a body odor that was discernible to just about anybody who came into contact with her. She didn't comb her hair. She didn't brush her teeth. She wore the same clothes day in and day out. She wore, even during the warm part of the year, the warmest part of the year, I should say, she would wear multiple layers of clothing that were just
That's why
inappropriate.
she had
to
so
the
much
weather.
body odor.
Those are some of the things that I
She was
observed.
What
wearing
are
a
those
lot of
typically signs or
clothes.
symptoms of her inability at that point to care for herself at the time she's in college, 21 years old?
Well, first of all, it's a sign that she's extremely immature, but clinically, those behaviors are consistent with schizophrenia, which is the diagnosis that I placed on her.
Now, before we
But
get
what
to your
else are
actual
they
diagnosis,
consistent
we're
with?
gonna go through the
They can
criteria
also
in a
be
minute.
consistent
Tell me
with a
what
lot
you
of
meant
other
when you
things
said
as well.
Now she's
Not
been in
just
jail, and
schizophrenia.
what how jail is different than when she was 4 years ago in college navigating life by herself.
From what I've been able to see,
Yep.
she feels okay about jail. She no longer feels threatened or fearful. Jail is really, sadly, a good place for her to be right now. She doesn't have to make any decisions for herself. Everything is decided, and she can beat
So then
herself.
why
She
was-
no longer fears threats from her
What was
mother.
it called? Air
You
school?
mentioned that jail is kind of, they tell you when to wake up.
Why
they tell
was
you to
that not
eat.
good for her?
And so she's not having to make those decisions or do that on her own.
Yeah, she really doesn't have to make any decisions on her own.
Nope.
Tell the jury
Every
briefly
decision
what
is
the
made
DSM-5
for
is.
you.
It's
Before I go there,
okay.
Oh,
was reading my notes. Tell me whether you have an opinion as to whether, based on the psychological abuse, the physical abuse at the hands of her mother, whether you have an opinion as to whether Nicole meets battered child syndrome. And I guess it would be appropriate at this point to kind of explain what battered child syndrome is.
Be right
to the
back.
jury.
Oh, I do have an opinion, and it is that she does suffer from battered child syndrome. Battered child syndrome is a term that originated from a pediatric radiologist named Henry Kemp, Dr. Kemp. And he was looking at x-rays of children who were abused. And what he was able to discover is that a lot of child abuse, physical child abuse, went undetected. Things like spiral fractures, things that could be seen with an x-ray. At that time, the modern scanning devices weren't available, but he coined the term battered child syndrome. And as it's evolved in the literature over the years, in the professional literature in psychology and psychiatry, it's come to encompass physical abuse, psychological abuse, and or sexual abuse. So basically what it is, it's a finding that this youngster was severely abused, either physically, psychologically, and or sexually, and that as a result of that abuse, she developed the typical psychological responses that we see. And typically what we see is somebody who goes through that kind of experience as a child develops significant personality issues. And that's what we've seen here with Nicole Nachtman. She never fully developed as a person. Her personality development was stunted, and she
She was the
suffers from
first
major mental
In the
illness,
medical community
schizophrenia.
to identify and recognize child abuse.
All right, go ahead and explain to the jury what the DSM-5 is.
This is it, this book. It's called the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders.
How's he an American
Fifth edition,
pediatrician?
published by the American
He was
Psychiatric
born in
Association. It
Poland.
is because it lays out all the required symptoms for all the recognized mental illnesses.
Died in
our field.
Hawaii.
So if it's not in this book, then most people, I'm not saying all people, but most people in the field would not make a diagnosis except on the basis of the criteria that are posted in this book, the DSM-5.
When you say people in the field, both psychologists and psychiatrists.
And any other mental health professionals.
That's not me, you guys. I didn't do
Through,
that.
I'm, for the record, as a demonstrative aid, page 99 of the DSM-5, the diagnostic criteria for schizophrenia. Walk us through
Sorry.
why you diagnosed Nicole Nachtman with schizophrenia, and let's go one by one.
Well, first it says to make this diagnosis, we have to have 2 or more of the following, each present for a significant portion of time during a 1-month period or less if successfully treated. There's been no treatment in this case, so that doesn't apply. At least one of these must be 1, 2, or 3. So the first criterion that needs to be met is delusions. Nicole meets that criterion. She explained to me that
Auditory.
she was convinced that her mother would kill her. This was at the time
Visual.
leading up to the homicides, which I don't believe is fact. A delusion is a fixed belief that someone has that can't be shaken by the truth. And almost always the fixed belief is false. Otherwise, we wouldn't call it a delusion. But her delusional thinking goes beyond that. She was convinced that Bob, Mr. Deans, had killed her dog. She was convinced that he had put dog feces in her room and then blamed it on her to cause trouble with her mother. She told me that I pretty much have the attitude that people are out to get me. She also had what
she has
we call
paranoia?
ideas of reference. These are a kind of delusion where you think that something you're seeing that's meant for all of us has some particular meaning for you personally. And the example that I would suggest meets that definition is after she returned to the campus.
Signs from God.
After these homicides, she saw a sign to the effect of, "You are one step closer to your dreams." That's a sign she saw in one of the buildings at college.
And what did she interpret that to mean?
She said, it was just like you just had a stillborn and go home and see a magazine that's full of pictures of babies. That sign was like a fuck you to me. She thought that sign was directed at her. That now that she had done this, she was one step closer to her dreams. And she saw that as an insult to her and intended as a quote, fuck you to her, which is another evidence of delusional thinking. The DSM refers to also bizarre delusions. Not all delusions are bizarre. You think that the FBI is tapping your phone. That's not a bizarre delusion. They're not tapping your phone, but they could be. Her bizarre delusion is, quote, being
They're tapping
alive
your phone.
and living are 2 different things. I don't think I really live,
can.
even on the outside. It was like being buried alive. I'm dying or already dead. That's a really bizarre statement. Really 2 statements on her behalf that I see as at time she had this delusion that she wasn't living, that she was already dead.
I think that's more
Does
of
that
just like
cover all the delusions before?
an
we move on?
observation.
Well, there's one other
More
thing,
like
and I'm
a,
not so sure
I'm
about
dead
this one.
inside.
But she
I don't even
she
know if
told
I'm
me that she
alive.
got a lot of feedback online about stuff she wrote. And she said at one point that somebody didn't like what she wrote and threatened to kill her and told her she should be dead, I guess. And
You're just
You
not sure if
guess?
that really happened.
I'm not sure that it really happened. It could have happened. And if it did happen, then it's not a delusion. But if it didn't happen, I would see that as delusional.
Now, you mentioned that part of the definition.
So you
of
don't
delusion
even
is
know if
it's
it
belief
happened
that
or
can't
it
be
didn't
Yeah.
happen.
Again, going back to those
So
video
again,
evaluations by the
you
state
don't
doctor,
know
Dr.
if
Lazaro.
these
And you
things
see evidence that,
actually
in fact,
happen.
Dr. Lazaro is
So you
attempting
don't know
to
what's
get her
real
off
and
this
what's
delusion
not.
that her mother was really going to
Yes,
kill her.
repeatedly she tried.
And what was the result of that?
She couldn't succeed because you're dealing with a delusional person, somebody with schizophrenia. It's not the doctor's fault.
Let me ask you another question. You had mentioned, and you had told us earlier yesterday, in fact, how you go about a mental status exam and
Yes.
kind of the questions that you ask in an attempt to get information. Is it typically your procedure or your way of doing things that if in fact you're
Practice.
evaluating somebody for one of these psychotic disorders and delusions is one of the criteria, you're going to ask the person or the subject about delusions?
Of course. I mean, that goes without saying. That's elementary.
So you're not going to wait for the person to volunteer their delusions. You're going to ask them as the mental health professional and expert, talk to me. Have you ever had delusions? Have you ever had hallucinations?
Yeah, well, I might not put it in quite those words.
Exactly.
For example, with delusions, I
They
talk about
don't
general kinds of
necessarily see them
delusions.
as
Have you ever felt
delusions.
this? Have you ever felt that? With regard to hallucinations, I generally ask, have you ever had any
You
unusual
see-
experiences?
Do you see
Well, no,
things
or
that
yes.
aren't really
It
there?
doesn't matter the answer to that. The follow-up from
You
me
see
is
things
then,
that
have
other
you ever
people don't
heard
see.
voices coming from a source you couldn't identify, coming from either inside your head or outside your head?
Do you ever
Have you
hear
ever
things
seen
that other
things,
people don't hear?
that other people couldn't see? Questions along those lines, yes.
I guess my point is you as the mental health professional are gonna probe into those areas.
Oh, yeah, and you can't wait for a subject or a patient to volunteer this information. Generally, they won't.
You know, you
If you
can
don't
also
ask, then you
smell
don't
things.
get a
You
complete
can
evaluation.
hallucinate
Your opinion is
smells.
sunk.
I forget what
Let's
it's
talk
called.
about criteria 2 under A, hallucinations. What,
Quiet,
if any, evidence did you see as to whether Nicole Nachtman suffered hallucinations?
Smell
She-
people burning.
Told me, and she had told others prior to the homicide, dating back at least to the time she came back from London in 2013, I believe it was, that she heard screaming in her head. Pretty much, it sounded like screaming, is what she said.
You're sure it's not just
Talked
ringing in
about,
your ears?
Hearing this
That all the
over time, and for at least
Quite
since she'd been back from England.
What's that
Her,
called?
her brother said she'd been screaming,
Tendinitis.
she'd had screaming in her head ever since she came back from London. He also said she's been screaming and she's been hearing screaming in her head, uncontrollable screaming in her head. It sounds like screaming is constantly bothering her. And this is his observation based on the summer that she spent with him in Washington State.
Now, is there a difference between, let's say, an auditory hallucination and a visual hallucination? And does in fact the DSM define what those are?
Yes,
Let's go to that for a second.
okay.
There's actually a glossary of terms in the back, I guess.
Yes,
Page 822, it appears.
yes, I have it. According to the DSM-5, a hallucination is a perception-like experience with a clarity and impact of a true perception, but without external stimulation of the relevant sensory organ. What that means is that there are different kinds of hallucinations. There are visual hallucinations, auditory hallucinations, tactile hallucinations, gustatory hallucinations. Sometimes people hallucinate smells, sometimes they hallucinate touch, sometimes they hallucinate visually, and sometimes they hallucinate auditorily. They go on to say one hallucinating person may recognize a false sensory experience, whereas another may be convinced that the experience is grounded in reality. And then they make it clear that they're not talking about what happens when you're asleep
Or
or
you're dreaming.
yeah, or when you're falling asleep, a so-called hypnagogic state. That does not refer to, that's not defined as a hallucination.
And what does it specifically say under auditory, under the hallucination definition?
A hallucination involving the perception of sound, mostly of the voice, most commonly of the voice.
Let me ask you this, in addition to, obviously, you said the DSM-5 is a guide in your profession.
Yes.
Are you also aware of any recent articles or literature which kind of define or explain auditory hallucinations? And if you could tell us from what source, if you have that information.
Yes, somewhere. Well, first let me tell you what it is, and if you want the exact article, I can pull it out.
Or just the source, is it something
yeah,
that
it's-
people in your field rely on?
Yeah, this is a journal called, I think it's called the Journal of Neuropsychiatry. It's a standard peer-reviewed journal in the field. Recent article looked at hallucinations, auditory hallucinations in particular, and noted that these hallucinations can appear to the individual who's experiencing the hallucinations. They can appear as if they're coming from inside the head or outside the head. And what they opined in this article was that those where it's coming from inside the head, those can sometimes be worse prognostically. In other words, people who have hallucinations that are internal, or that they view them as internal, may have a worse prognosis overall than those whose hallucinations seem to have an external source. But the one thing they made clear is that the general consensus in the field is that auditory hallucinations can be internal or they can be external,
All right,
and they can be perceived either way.
and go back to the diagnostic criteria for schizophrenia. Anything else with regard to evidence of hallucinations that Nicole may have been experiencing that you can think of?
Yes, Angelica Henwood talked about how Nicole would spend hours on her computer. And she said that in her view, Nicole was responding to something, talking to something, not on the computer. She was speaking out loud, and Ms. Henwood said it made no sense. And Eric indicated that.
Eric Lear?
Yes, Eric Lear, yeah, that she had been talking to herself ever since she started college. What we call that is responding to internal stimuli, and that's part of a good mental status examination to determine whether the individual is responding to external internal stimuli, i.e. hallucinations. Many times people won't acknowledge that, but you'll see it because you'll see them talking to themselves, or you'll see them responding to someone who apparently isn't there. And that's what I see Ms. Henwood testifying to, and Eric Lear, his version supports that as well.
And was Eric Lear one of the instances I think he described in his testimony with regard to the restaurant, and she's literally sitting there talking to somebody who wasn't next to her?
Yes, exactly. And she's, again, what we would say in our field is she is responding to internal stimuli, whatever it is. It's not somebody talking to her. She's talking to a voice or responding to something that she's experiencing internally. That is a delusion. I'm sorry, that's a hallucination, not delusion.
What about disorganized speech? Any evidence of that with Nicole?
Yes, throughout my examination of her, throughout Dr. Lazaro's examination of her, and as reported in the testimony and report by Dr. Heidi, her thinking is often very disorganized. She goes off on tangents, she's rambling, she's circumstantial, she's derailed in her thinking. Dr. Lazaro commented upon it numerous times in her evaluation of Nicole, that she wasn't making sense, that she was making the doctor feel crazy, that she was constantly going off on tangents. Those are all evidence of disorganized behavior as reflected in speech. The other thing is that there's something that we call loose associations that is almost exclusively seen in psychosis, like schizophrenia. She would come to a point where she'd be talking about one thing, and then that would trigger another thing, and she'd be off on that. That would trigger another thing, and she'd be off on that. And minutes later, even I'd forgotten what the question was that I asked, because her thought became so derailed. And she would
Sounds kind of like ADHD.
Let me ask you a question, and I know we're going to talk about the police interview later when we talk about insanity and your opinion as it relates to that. But did you see evidence of this concept that you're describing now, just in the midst of she's being questioned by homicide detectives and she's rambling on about the Snow Queen and this fictional story?
Well, certainly during the 10 hours that she was in police custody, the videotapes that I reviewed, her behavior reflects affect that's grossly inappropriate to the situation. She has just killed her stepfather and her mother. She's just been arrested by the police.
Also might
and
show
she's
signs
talking
of
about
being on the
fantasy.
spectrum
She's talking about this movie.
and disassociative.
with
Frozen?
Frozen, yes. I know it very well because my granddaughter was a big Frozen fan when she was 5 years old. She was
Most little
talking
girls
away
are.
and laughing and having a grand old time with the police. And it was just totally inappropriate. I definitely would say that is inappropriate behavior, and it is grossly disorganized behavior. I've never seen anything quite that inappropriate in all the years that I've been doing this.
Any other evidence?
But
just
you
in
know,
accounts from
you
former roommates
could
or friends
also
that were
say
not friends, the one
that a
friend
lot of
Laura, college,
sociopaths
any information,
are inappropriate in their
other,
behavior
examples of this
as
program? I
well,
guess we're now at 4. Did you
Yes.
leave 3? Okay.
because they
Mostly
have some sort
disorganized
of
or catatonic behavior.
mental
As I
illness,
mentioned before, she was found sleeping in the bathroom on the floor. She's found sleeping in the hallway on the floor. She
and their
would,
behaviors are a
sleep all
bit
day,
odd as
stay up all
well.
night. She dressed inappropriately for the
But
weather.
they also
conditions.
go-
Mentioned she didn't wash her clothing. She didn't brush her teeth. She didn't comb her hair. She had a discernible body odor. All those
You've already
are
said this. We're
signs
repeating
of
ourselves now.
grossly disorganized behavior.
Now I want to go to, I guess, negative symptoms.
Yes.
Which is
Okay,
Negative
I'll be right back. We've
symptoms
heard this already.
are,
No.
you're not going to see
Wrong
them as a
one.
clinician. You're not going to
Mute.
see the person talking about delusions. You're not going to see the person admitting to hallucinations. Negative symptoms, well, the first that I observed was what we call avolition, AVOLITION. It's a severe lack of initiative to accomplish tasks in your life. She stopped attending classes. She stopped attending to her hygiene. She let her personal appearance go. As I said, she didn't shower. She didn't brush her teeth. She didn't comb her hair. She stayed in her room. She stopped eating properly. She lost interest in engaging with other people other than on the computer. And it's not entirely clear that she even engaged with people on the computer. She spoke rarely to anybody. She retreated into a fantasy world. What she said to me was, if life becomes more miserable and demeaning, I'll go back into my fantasy. She slept through her classes, slept all day, didn't clean her room. She also described, as I mentioned, this message, and I don't know if it was just her interpretation of it. I don't know if I would call that a negative symptom, but somebody had told her to die, to kill herself. And when she described this to me, she was laughing inappropriately. She had pretty much lost communication and touch with other people. I asked her why she didn't communicate with others. She said, most conversations are related to the past. My past is negative, so I don't have that much to talk about. Her brother, Joey, talked about the summer she spent with him, that he had to virtually drag her out of the bedroom to get her to come out. He said that her room stunk and that he would have to tell her and remind her repeatedly to take a shower. In terms of abolition, she said, I felt emotionally hopeless, like life itself, like a dead end. I had no motivation, no inspiration. I was going nowhere, no goal, no vision, no dreams. It's like I was drifting out to sea. I was technically not living at all. And then she described this fantasy life in college. She said, classes are every other day, so you have empty space for your brain to rest and procrastinate and take a break and go into my fantasy world. A lot of times I didn't want to come back to reality. I'd stop my thought processes, and when I returned, I'd have to ask myself where I was heading to. You can't just bookmark where you are. I was more consumed by fantasy. There were more windows to slip out of, and I had a hard time slipping back in. During college, my fantasies blurred with reality. There was nothing to focus on. I was just here without a compass, map, or direction. Fantasy was something I was familiar with. It had a plot that's going somewhere to a degree. I acted out fantasy. A lot of the characters are inspiring. I try to take their personalities with me.
Now, when you go move into that same area of the DSM where it talks about associated features that support a diagnosis of schizophrenia, I believe you talked about that inappropriate affect in the first line, which you described the laughing at inappropriate times and things like that.
Yes.
Is there anything else within this section that supports a diagnosis of schizophrenia for Nicole?
Well, clearly the disturbed sleep pattern hits it right on the head. Daytime sleeping and nighttime activity. Also,
Really?
includes deficits in the ability to infer the intentions of other people. This is where the delusions come in, I believe. She was unable to discern how other people were going to react. She assumed the negative. And this came up repeatedly with Dr. Lazaro. She hit on it repeatedly, that Nicole Nachtman sees the world not in black and white, but in black, very negatively. That she believes that the intentions of other people are to take advantage of her, to get her, and in the case of her mother, to kill her. The last thing that's noted there is individuals with psychosis may lack insight or awareness of their disorder. This really jumped out at me with Nicole Nachtman. She doesn't understand that she's mentally ill. She did her best to convince me that she wasn't mentally ill. She thinks that these are just problems in daily living, that she just doesn't like to associate with people. She prefers to be on a computer, to be in a fantasy world. She doesn't see anything wrong with that. That's what we call lack of insight. She has no insight into her disorder. And to that, I would add, and it's mentioned in the DSM as well, that a lack of insight is one of the characteristics that bodes poorly. It's a poor prognostic factor. If you don't know that you're mentally ill, or you won't accept the fact that you're mentally ill, you're unlikely to accept treatment. And that's what we're seeing with her in the jail. She doesn't want to be treated because she doesn't feel that she has any mental illness.
Let me go back to the time frame that was discussed in A.
I don't believe that either.
Explain, the time, I guess.
Because if you're saying she's so docile,
before you can give a
odds are she's going to take
Yeah.
whatever medication she thinks she's going to
onset
need.
began with Nicole and whether it meets that requirement of the time frame.
Well, some of the witness accounts occurred before she went to London. But I would say for sure, these symptoms emerged after she came back from London.
Which would have been in 2013.
Yes, but some of the symptoms were present before then.
Now, within this part of the DSM, I want to show you a graphic that we used yesterday.
Or she doesn't really have any
Might just
active
explain
symptoms
What this
of
shows
schizophrenia,
with regard to schizophrenia.
and that's why she's not being treated for anything.
Yes. This
Start with schizotypal.
there's a diagnosis called schizotypal personality disorder. That's at the low end of the schizophrenia spectrum.
Oh, we're on the same spectrum.
Yeah,
Okay.
it goes from there all the way to schizophrenia. Part of the distinction, you have schizotypal at one end, then brief psychotic disorder, schizophreniform disorder, and schizophrenia. Some of these can be distinguished based on how long the symptoms lasted. Whether it was 1 day to less than a month, that would be brief psychotic disorder. Whether it was 1 month to less than 6 months, schizophreniform disorder, or if it lasted 6 months or longer, it would be schizophrenia. This line on the left is drawn to distinguish schizotypal personality disorder. The main difference between being schizotypal and being schizophrenic is that schizophrenia requires evidence of hallucinations and delusions. Schizotypal personality disorder does not. It's a much less serious end of the scale, but it's still on the scale of schizophreniform or schizophrenia disorders.
Thank you, Dr.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm sorry.
the only thing I can add to that is, and this is from the DSM-5 as well, that not all people who have schizophrenia previously suffered from schizotypal.
Okay.
And not all people who suffer from schizotypal ultimately develop schizophrenia. I believe, based on the criteria for schizotypal personality, that what we were seeing with Nicole Nachtman when she was younger was schizotypal personality. It fits it like a glove. But once she starts having hallucinations and delusions, that puts her from
Out of
that
that
end
category.
into schizophrenia. Yes.
Can you explain what malingering is to the jury?
Yes, it's a conscious effort to create in another person the belief that you suffer from an illness, including mental illness. And it's usually for what we call secondary gain. It's to gain something. It's not uncommon for people in the forensic evaluations I do to see them exaggerate symptoms or make up symptoms. That's malingering.
What is your opinion as to whether you saw evidence that Nicole was feigning or exaggerating or making up any of these symptoms that she was reporting both to you, Dr. Lazaro, and all the records you reviewed?
It's quite to the contrary. As I said, she wants us to believe she's not mentally ill. She sees that as a stigma, and she relates honestly and openly about her feelings and her behaviors, but she doesn't see them as mentally ill at all. So to me, that's the direct opposite of someone who's malingering. She's not malingering.
Now, are there tests that mental health professionals in your field can administer to determine if in fact an individual is
CSM-5?
malingering or not?
No. There are checklists that purport to help people make that decision. My view of them is that they may be helpful in some cases, but they're not tests. There's no acid test. Even a polygraph is not an acid test as to whether somebody's malingering a mental illness.
Just to first ask you, did you administer any of these checklists or instruments with Nicole?
No.
In the Johnny Depp case, yes, there was a test.
Dr. Heidi's report, correct?
Yes, I did.
And in Dr. Heidi's 52-page report, she documented several of these instruments that she administered to Nicole and gave the scores and then kind of the validity scores, and she talked
Yes.
about all that yesterday.
Yes, and the thing to keep in mind about that is those validity scores, they help establish that Nicole is being truthful about her answers to the questions on that particular test. It doesn't rule out malingering, it doesn't rule in malingering. It doesn't rule out truth-telling or lying in other areas. It says when she took this test, she was telling the truth.
And so you had that data available to you with regard to what the scores were?
Yes, I looked
prior
at
to
it.
them.
Yes.
In addition to Dr. Heidi's, the tests or the instruments that she administered to Nicole, were you also provided the SIMS from the state doctor, Dr. Lazaro,
Yeah.
and that?
Yeah, Dr. Lazaro kindly forwarded that to me
Okay.
so I could review it.
And is that common that those types of things can be shared among doctors and experts, just
Yeah.
not with us?
Yes, and the reason is because we want to maintain the security of the checklist or the test if it is a test, so that people in the future don't know the questions that are going to be asked.
And what was that, and we'll call it the SIMS, what was that, what is the purpose of that, or what is?
It's, well, let me pull it out. The SIMS is, it actually stands for Structured Inventory of Malingered Symptomatology, and it's trademarked. It's, so that's part of the reason why it can't be generally distributed. But basically, the idea that these two psychologists who developed this had was that there are certain questions you can ask, and this is filled out completely by the patient. And their idea was that there are certain things that could be asked, and if you chalked up enough of them, then it might be evidence that you are malingering.
You use the word might, why did you use that word?
Well, because even they acknowledge that there's no clear test for malingering. This is just a guide. It may be helpful. And I agree with that. I don't think that there is any test for malingering, and they don't purport this to be a test. It's a structured inventory, they call it.
Did you also have an opportunity to review the manual associated with this SIMS test that Dr. Lazaro or instrument she administered to Nicole?
Yes.
And what specifically does the manual
Oh, no.
require the person administering it to do?
To read the instructions verbatim to the individual who's filling out the questions.
Let me stop you there. You had an opportunity to review the state doctor's evaluation, the videotape, correct?
Yes.
And in that video evaluation, was Dr. Lazaro actually administering this SIMS to Nicole?
She gave it to her, yes.
Did she follow that specific requirement that the manual indicates to repeat the instructions or read the instructions verbatim?
No.
What you mean, no?
Is there also something else within the manual that indicates you should use other sources when determining an opinion on malingering or opining on malingering?
Yeah, it says, and this is from the authors of this checklist, the SIMS is not intended to serve as a diagnostic tool for feigning in isolation. Individuals identified as potential malingerers through the use of the SIMS should be referred for more extensive assessment. A determination of feigning should be made in the context of comprehensive evaluation only, whereby multiple sources of data, for example, psychosocial, psychiatric, and medical history, clinical interview, comparison of subjective reports of symptoms to objective information and observations, results from feigning specific and psychological inventories, as well as multiple assessment devices. So they make it clear that not only would you need more data from various sources, but you need to have multiple assessment devices. In other words, other psychological testing
You're hurting me.
before you could say someone was malingering based on the score that he or she attained on this inventory.
When Dr. Lazaro provided you the actual test or instrument that she administered to Nicole, did she, along with it, were you able to view the scores and how, in the various areas that the instrument was measuring?
Yes,
And in fact, did that measure or that instrument indicate that Nicole was in any way malingering, feigning, or exaggerating symptoms when it came to psychosis?
no, in fact, her score is 0 for malingering with regard to psychosis. And schizophrenia is psychosis.
You gonna watch with me?
Dr. Ewing, I want to go now
What do you
to
think?
Nicole's discussion with you about the killings.
Okay.
Obviously,
Oh.
your ultimate opinion is you're gonna believe, you believe Nicole was insane at the time of the offenses, and we'll go through the jury instruction in a minute. But can you kind
I
of
mean,
just describe
Does he
to
think
the
that?
jury Nicole's account of the killings, and what evidence of schizophrenia, severe mental illness, psychosis, delusional thinking you observed in her account with respect to the killings of Bob and Miriam?
Well, first of all, it's obvious to me that she was suffering from a severe mental illness at the time. She was suffering from schizophrenia, which it's no exaggeration, I think, to say that schizophrenia is a cancer of mental illness. It's the most severe mental illness. We discussed what led up to it, and it's clear to me that she was delusional and that she believed that her mother would kill her when she revealed all of these lies and half-truths and evasions that she had used with her mother. Things lying about her bicycle not being stolen, lying about renting a shed to store her belongings, lying about the dormitory that she had gotten a room that she didn't forget to get the room. There were a whole bunch of really small things that piled up for her. Things that for a normal person, I wouldn't see as all that awful. And I certainly wouldn't see them as your mother's going to kill you, literally kill you when you tell her these things. She also seemed to feel delusionally that her mother had some kind of omnipotence, that her mother could get things out of her that she didn't want her to give to her mother, that her mother could question her and make her somehow talk, which I see as delusional, because I don't see how her mother could do that. And I noticed that in Dr. Heidi's testimony, she talked about how even after, long after these killings and long after she'd been charged with these killings, she was talking about how her mother would help determine what the criminal justice system did with her. So she was delusional, and a lot of the delusions focused on her mother.
Let's back up a little bit because as we now know, Bob was killed first.
Yes.
Can you talk about what Nicole's mindset was? Was she suicidal? What's going on before the killing of Bob?
What she indicated
Son
to
of
me,
Sam heard
it
dogs
makes sense
tell
to
him
me,
what to do.
is that she was suicidal. She was planning to kill herself.
He was delusional.
She had
He still went to jail.
what she thought was the nerve to kill herself. And when I asked her why she killed Bob, her stepfather, she said, "I don't know what my thought process was. An overwhelming fear. It was like a flash forward. It felt like a confrontation with my mother was taking place. It was like that fast forwarded through my head like a movie. I thought, I'm going to die. Mom's going to kill me, and they're going to cover it up. I can't explain killing Bob. Fear does not have a rationality. Even though nothing was happening, I felt like I was suffocating. It was very hard to live. I had dug my own grave with lies. It was more like a panic. I shot Bob in the head. I was planning to shoot myself. He was there. I shot him in the back of the head, one shot. I panicked, and I thought someone would hear and call the cops and come and arrest me."
I want to put up the insanity jury instruction. Doctor, are you familiar with this?
Yes.
And this is likely going to be the instruction that the judge gives the jury in this case. First of all, when we're talking about insanity, are we talking about now, 4 years later, or are we talking about August of 2015 when these offenses occurred?
We're talking about at the time of the offenses.
So let's go through the prongs. And in fact, the first sentence says, if you can read that.
Yes, I can. Do you want me to read it?
Yes.
An issue in this case is whether Nicole Nachtman was insane when the crime allegedly was committed. So that's time of offense.
Okay.
A person is considered to be insane when, one, she has a mental infirmity, disease, or defect. She obviously is mentally ill, and she suffers from schizophrenia, which is a lifelong, treatable, but incurable illness. Because of this condition, A, she did not know what she was doing or its consequences. Or B, although she knew what she was doing and its consequences, she did not know it was wrong.
Is your opinion in this case as to whether Nicole Nachtman was insane at the time of the offenses, and I'm going to ask you about each offense,
Okay.
apply, or are you basing that on prong A?
It's almost done. Calm down.
I believe she had a mental disease or defect, and because of that mental disease or defect, she didn't know what she was doing, and she didn't know the consequences of what she was doing. With regard to B, which only comes into question if A is not met, I don't have an opinion on that.
I can't let you
There is
down.
evidence in the record to suggest that she did know that it was wrong at or around the time of these killings. Legally wrong.
Meaning she knew it was wrong to kill somebody.
Yes,
You believe there's evidence to suggest that.
yes.
You don't need to go, or the jury instruction does not require a finding of A and B because there's an or there separating the two. Is that your understanding?
That's correct.
And your opinion as to whether Nicole was insane at the time of the offenses, you're using prong A.
Yes, both portions. She did not know what she was doing,
You're
and
gonna
she did not
fall.
know its consequences.
Now, let's break them up into Bob. Is that your opinion as it relates to
You are
the
gonna
killing
jump
of
off.
Robert Deans?
Yes,
And is that based on what you've just testified to as far as the mental infirmity, disease, or defect, but more importantly, what you just relayed to us as far as her report to you about what happened when she killed Bob or what her thought process was?
it's both. My opinion is that she was ready to commit suicide. She told me that there was a phone call that she overheard between her stepfather and her mother in which they were discussing financial difficulties. And this for Nicole, somehow she interpreted this as a knock on her, that it was, she was the cause. Her mother was spending money to send her to college. Her mother was giving her money for a car, giving her money to live on. She took that as a negative for her. That just added one more log to the suicidal fire that was already burning, so to speak. She told me that killing Bob pretty much guaranteed that her mother would kill her. And I asked her, and I believe that Dr. Lazaro asked her too, well, if you thought your mother was going to kill you, but you're going to kill yourself, why is that such a bad thing? You'll get your wish. If you're suicidal and somebody comes along and says, I'll kill you, why does that bother you? She went on to explain further that she was ambivalent, that, and she said that's probably more directed to Dr. The state's doctor, Dr. Lazaro, but she said it to me as well, that she had a hard time killing herself. That, and she explained to Dr. Lazaro that, and this is true, in my experience, I've dealt with a lot of suicidal patients over the course of my career. It's not easy to kill yourself. Many people don't succeed in killing themselves because it's
They don't
so
want to.
difficult, even though they want to kill themselves. She was ambivalent at best.
Subconsciously,
She said
they don't
that,
really want to.
and this is coming from her explanation. to
Kind of
Dr.
do,
Lazaro,
but they kind of
that,
don't.
the will to live basically kicks in. She said it's like when you're drowning. You may want to die, but your body kicks in and won't let it happen.
These are Nicole's words,
These
correct?
are basic, I paraphrase,
Yes, go ahead.
not a direct quote. But my interpretation of what she was saying, both to Dr. Lazaro and to me, was I want to kill myself. I don't want to kill myself. I want to die. I want to live. Marked ambivalence is one of the hallmarks of schizophrenia. And she's suicidal, but she can't do it. And killing Bob, her stepfather, pretty much ensured in her mind that her mother would kill her.
What is your opinion as to whether Nicole Nachtman was insane, again, using the same criteria we talked about, prong 1 and then prong 2A, as it relates to the killing of her mother, Miriam Deans?
Again, she has a mental infirmity, disease, or defect. As a result of that, she didn't know what she was doing or its consequences. Both. And again, I would have to say that there is evidence, subsequent evidence, that is evidence of behavior that occurred after the killings that I believe could be read as suggesting that she knew it was legally wrong to kill her parents.
Which that would be prong B, and you're opining insanity under prong A.
Yes.
But she knew it was wrong because she threw the gun away.
Or among patients who suffer from schizophrenia, people who may, as we're sitting today in court, responding to external stimuli, looking around or fidgety versus someone who may have schizophrenia but isn't exhibiting all those symptoms 24 hours a day.
Well, people who have schizophrenia, it's a very severe mental illness. It's the most severe, but they're college professors. I have a colleague, not where I work, but who's a law professor. She's schizophrenic. She's written a book about how she tried and struggled and overcame a lot of the symptoms of the disorder to go on to become a law professor. Now that's a rare case, I would agree. But in my practice, I see many people who are schizophrenic, who have jobs, who have a relatively normal life, but from time to time, the symptoms overwhelm them. And it can be in a very short period of time that the symptoms increase or decrease. And there are times when I've seen people, as a professional, as a forensic psychologist, who I know they're schizophrenic because the history is clear, And yet, in talking to them, I don't see at that time specific symptoms of schizophrenia. So it's not a 24-hour, 7-day a week, 365-day a year, and 366 in leap year kind of proposition. It doesn't manifest itself all the time. And some of the symptoms that are manifested, we can't see. Like, I'm looking at Ms. Nachtman right now. I can't tell what she's thinking. She may be hallucinating right now. She may be delusional. I don't know that.
She doesn't know that.
With
She's
regard to
not.
the records you reviewed, and you've already indicated the basis.
I think
of your
she
opinion
lived
for
in a
schizophrenia
fantasy
and
world
insanity, but did you observe within the
and
records
didn't know real from
mental health
fake.
deterioration over time occurring in Nicole Nachtman's life?
And then she was like, oh,
corroborative data or
well,
evidence to
shit, I
suggest
shot
that
Bob.
Yes.
Now my mommy's going to be mad at me, so I might as well kill her too.
Psychological
And
evaluation
oh,
was done
I
on
feel
her.
so much
Clear
better
warning
now.
signs that this child was having significant emotional and psychological problems. And then again, when she was either 7th and 8th or 8th and 9th grade at the Air Academy, her behavior was clearly troubled. She was clearly a troubled child, and
So why didn't somebody at the Air
The
Academy
school
do anything?
required her to have a psychiatric evaluation. I didn't see that evaluation, but
why
I did
not?
see that there was no follow-up, no treatment ever for Nicole.
There's been a discussion throughout the trial that she got into FSU. She was obviously intelligent. She had a good enough GPA. Can you explain mental illness and intelligence? I think you said
You
you're.
can be
probably
super
a law
smart.
professor,
Yeah.
but Go ahead.
Right, and a graduate of Yale Law School. And many people who have
Super
severe
smart and have a mental
disorders
illness. It's
are very
possible.
bright. I would say, based on my interactions with Nicole, that she is at least average intelligence, and she may be somewhat above average intelligence. She clearly had the intelligence to get into college. She clearly had the intelligence to do better academically than she did. And what we saw is in the years leading up to the killing, her grades went down and down and down and down. She was in a downward spiral academically. That wasn't because she was incapable of doing the work intellectually. It was because she was incapable of doing the work because of her mental illness. So there's a huge difference between intelligence and mental illness.
Dr. Ewing, yesterday, I believe we discussed, in talking about Nicole's childhood and her history, the number of schools she had went to. And I think you had mentioned yesterday, you weren't sure if it was somewhere between 9 and 12.
Yes.
If I show you a list, will that refresh your
Yes.
recollection as to how many schools she went to and kind of document not only schools, but the state she was in?
Yeah, I'd appreciate that.
Would like to know as well.
13 different schools in Florida and Virginia.
Those seem to be the states she was moving back and forth from.
Yeah, I went Tampa, Virginia, Tampa, Virginia, Virginia, Tampa, Virginia, Virginia, Tampa, Virginia, Melbourne, Florida, Virginia, back to Tampa.
Thank you, Dr. I want to elaborate a little bit within the insanity instruction and within with regard to your opinion on the consequences portion of this. Where in the jail visit with her brother, the police interview, all of the documents you reviewed to support that opinion that in fact she didn't appreciate or understand the consequences of what she had done or even what was about to happen?
Well, I believe that she didn't appreciate the consequences of what she was doing at the time she committed these acts, but it went beyond that. As Dr. Heidi pointed out, she continued not to really understand what she did. She continued to talk about her mother in the first person, or as if she was alive, her stepfather, as if he were still alive, using the present tense. She talked about with Dr. Heidi about how her mother had some control over what would happen in these criminal proceedings against her. And she, when asked about what the legal consequences would be for her, she seemed to think that she could be banished from the state, put on some kind of probation, fined, made to do community service type work. She had no clue. Even then, this is well after the killing. She's still without a clue as to what the legal consequences are. But I want to make sure that I'm being clear here, because I'm saying she didn't understand the consequences at the time of the homicide. That's what the statute requires us to look at.
Yes, sir. With regard to, again, you mentioned, even after the instances, with regard to the jail visitation or even the police interrogation that's within a day.
But
or
she
so.
understood
What
enough to
about
throw
those
the
two?
gun
Didn't see
away.
evidence that she's just not grasping what has just occurred.
Well, as I said earlier, here's somebody who has just killed her stepfather, shot him to death, shot to death her mother, and is taken into custody by the police. And she's acting as if life is just another ordinary day. She's chatting
She's
with police
free.
officers, telling them about Frozen, telling them about the fantasy stuff she does online, laughing, giggling, totally inappropriate.
Watch some
And then
interrogations.
The
there's
video,
some
I take it you're talking
there's
about the
some
video with
people
her
out
brother.
there.
Yes, which I believe was within maybe a week of her arrest.
Yeah, and she's happy as a lark. Her affect and attitude are totally inappropriate.
Happy
And to me,
as a
they reflect
lark.
that she doesn't get it. She doesn't understand what she's done and what the legal consequences are likely to be for her. In fact, I believe she talked about Christmas. She's
Buying Christmas presents
Yeah,
for his children.
right. She's making plans to celebrate Christmas with him and his children, which is obviously far-fetched. I would
If can
say
have a mo- oh, I'm sorry.
delusional.
Thank you, Dr. If I can have a moment?
Absolutely.
I don't have any
Okay.
questions. Thank you, Dr. Young.
Does anybody in the jury need a break at this time before we begin?
Oh Lord. So we're gonna end that one today, and then we will start up on another one and do the cross with the state on the next one. I'm curious to see what the state's doctor says, because obviously this is the defense, and I mean they're doctors and they have their own thing, and I don't think they're saying it just because it's the defense and the defense is paying them or whatever. But I mean I legit think that that's what they think that this is. And I mean, it very well could be. I'm not an expert. Like I said, I'm not an expert. I just worked in the field for as long as I have. And again, I have no experience with this lady. I have no history on this lady. So I don't know. She very well could be schizophrenic. But to me, with the evidence that they're presenting, if I were a juror, to me, they're not presenting her as schizophrenic. I'm seeing signs of ADHD. She can't focus. She's off in her own world. School is not keeping her attention. She did go away to college, and when she goes away to college, she cannot function on her own because when she's been home, mom has done everything for her because mom is that controlling. I wouldn't necessarily say that she can't do any of these things because of her mental health. I would say she can't do many of these things because she's never had to. Just my opinions. I also could see, her being on the autism spectrum. I feel like there's another way to say that now. I don't know. But her being unable to pick up on social cues, or, not having the best social life, or being able to do like her mannerisms and the way that just the things that he would explain, and the other doctor, like that's what I would lean more towards. Now the whole what they're calling delusions and hallucinations, like the auditory hallucinations, like screaming in her head, that's the consistent one that they keep going back to, is that she says that there's been screaming in her head. So far that's all I can remember as far as what auditory hallucinations that she's had. She hasn't been seeing things, only the screaming in her head. She hasn't heard voices. And the delusions is what they're calling it, is delusions, as you know, her mom is going to kill her. Well, I wouldn't even go as far as saying that those are delusions. I would say those are fantasies. She has an active imagination. Like, she clearly thinks she's Elsa. She lives in a different world. You know, who's to say she hasn't made up characters in her own head that she has manifested, and they're real to her? Again, those could be also hallucinations, but I think it's different than schizophrenia. Like, I know that's an easy one to clutch onto, but I don't know. I see it different. But who knows? Let me know what you think. But yeah, we'll catch back up on some more tomorrow. It'll be cross of him and then recross. Or it'll be cross and then redirect. And then maybe recross and then redirect. I don't know. There's still some time left on him. And then I think we get into the other doctor. I think that's all from, I don't know. I hate to try to guess and then be wrong. So, but we're almost done. We're almost done, I do believe. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Maybe about 5, 6 videos left, depending on how long I want to sit for any of them. Might be able to do it in 4, maybe 3, but possibly 5. Just depends. Okay, well, let me know what you think. Like, subscribe, comment below. Let me know what you think. And join us on the next one, because we're going to get into some cross here, and it shall be interesting. I always like that. And then, yeah. Okay. Catch you on the next one.